All right, guys, welcome aboard. We're looking now at the January 20th edition of the Mac Forum video chat. Normally we do these on Sunday, but I had a little bit of a technical difficulty last night. So we're going to take a look today at the at some of that same information, and I'll redo the screencast and screenshots there. Let's go ahead and kind of dive right into everything. First of all, welcome to our newest member. It looks like Shossmeister. Hope I've pronounced that correctly. My apologies if I didn't. Um, Want to welcome all of our new members, folks that have joined in the last week. Hope that you are enjoying your time in the forum and hope that you are finding everything kind of handy. And in the way of a forum roundup, let's go ahead and dive right in. As you can see, I've got iTunes open on my desktop. We'll be talking about that in a minute. I have a couple of iTunes tips for you for this week and a few other things go along. Uh, so let's go ahead and dive right into everything. First of all, there are a couple of forum threads that have popped up this week devoted to the upcoming issue, the releases of iOS 10, and also um, the new what's being called Mac OS Sierra instead of OS 10 Sierra. And a couple of threads come up in the forum regarding that. Some of our members are uh, kind of concerned that most of the changes are eye candy, and some of them are kind of what you might call niceties. But also, one of the things about it is that the when you get into these kinds of things, I think the big change is going to be something that it's going to take a while for us to see who these how these changes play out. And I think the biggest change, which is not really going to be eye candy, is going to be in both the iOS 10 release and the Sierra release, is the extent to which, first of all, you have Sierra and Siri coming to the Mac on Sierra. And also, you're going to have one of the things that's being opened up a bit more is Siri coming to the Mac. So that's going to be something that I think will both, as more and more people get involved with this and kind of open things up and have a chance to play with it, it's going to look and feel a little bit different, and some of the changes are going to be quite nice. Um, Also, another thread that came up in the forum this week, and I don't have this forum thread page up at the moment in my browser, but it's one that you can easily find, has to do with one of our members needing to delete a standard user account. They loan their Mac to someone, and that person added some new software. And the owner of the Mac, when they got the machine back, wanted to know how to go about deleting that standard user account that they had created. And the reason I mention this is the standard user account, I think, points to a misconception or misunderstanding that some users have. I had either forgotten or did not realize that the standard user can install software. Some software will install in a standard user account. If you've got something that just installs basically by a drag and drop and dragging it into the application folder, um, that may install in a standard user account as long as it does not patch into the system folder or patch into the library folder. So those are going to be the kinds of things that a standard user account will be able to install. The good news is for most of those kinds of applications, if you delete the standard user account, you're going to delete anything that they install that would have been in their folder, but it's not going to get rid of the things that, the applications will still be sitting in your applications folder. The only time it deletes an application that they've installed is if they placed it in the applications folder that's inside their user folder. That I know that can cause a little bit of confusion, but basically, whatever's inside their user folder in that application folder, it's available only to them. That would get deleted. It may leave a little bit of cruft around here and there. Generally, nothing is going to harm the system, but that pretty much just gets you back up to speed on standard user. If you want to guarantee that a user cannot install anything, either set up a guest user account or set up the standard user and then make some adjustments with parental controls on that account to kind of control what happens. But don't count on just the standard user alone preventing them from installing software. Also, there's quite a bit of discussion in the forum about the need for making regular backups. Been a couple of threads regarding backups. There's an ongoing one that goes back a couple of years, and we also get new threads periodically about backing up. And there seems to be some misconceptions about the way that Time Machine behaves. As you know, Time Machine is the backup utility that's included with OS 10. And one of the misconceptions that's come up in one of the threads is that Time Machine backs up everything every time it's run. That is not true. Time Machine does a full backup the first time it's run, and then from then on, it creates some what are called hard links to the old files, and then it makes a new file for any file that has been modified since the last backup. So if you started your backups, let's say a week ago, and it's been making backups every hour on the hour on its normal schedule, Time Machine doesn't back up everything. So it's just it's going to make a link to the existing files, and then for those files that have changed in that hour, it's going to back up those files. When you do the next backup, if different files have been backed up, new files will be created for those. Uh, I think probably next week, we'll spend a bit more time talking about some of the intricacies of Time Machine. It is a very simple program to use, but you can create some problems for yourself if you make certain mistakes. So I think probably next week we'll be discussing some of the ins and outs of using Time Machine. And then lastly, I want to get to a couple of tips. Um, we'll talk in the Apple News in just a bit about some other web things that are coming up that I want to be sure you know about. But right now, I want to get to a couple of tips and tricks that you may not notice. As you can see, I have my iTunes library up on the screen here, and I'm just kind of scrolling down to get to a particular list. I want to show you a couple of things about iTunes. One of them has to do with, let me just scroll down to my Louis Armstrong collection here, and I'll show you something that I don't know for sure if this is new to me or if it's been going on for a while and I just now realized what was causing it. I think this is something that's been happening for a while and I didn't notice it until just recently. I was adding some music to my library the other day and I was tagging some of the music that was brought in because I wasn't connected to the internet while I was doing the ripping. And what happened is a lot of the music I added got pulled in without the track info, and I had to go back and add it later. And I pulled in a multi disc set, and I noticed that a lot of the tracks that should have been on disc two were not there. And when I looked, they were thrown in kind of willy nilly with disc one. So let me show you why that happens. If you got some multi disc sets, notice, look at this Louis Armstrong set here that I have on the screen. Um, you'll notice that it's a multi disc set. The entries are under one graphic, one album art graphic, and both discs, the contents of both discs are there. Now, here's how you get that to happen. Let's take a look at one of the tracks. And you can edit this information by multiple tracks at the same time. I'm going to do Command I to bring up the editing window for the tracks real quick. And let's look at this. And this is why it appears in sets. Notice I've got the album and artist information here. I've got the track number. As you can see, that's the track that I've selected right here. And then look at this disc number. For the purposes of what we're talking about tonight, that's the important number. It says this is disc 2 of 2. If there were more discs, it would say 2 of 3, 2 of 4, whatever is appropriate. Now, notice the track that I've selected, St. James Infirmary, is listed in track 2 and in disc 2, and it's track number 2. What happens if I've forgotten to put this this disc number in? Let's look at what happens. I'm going to change that. I'm going to get rid of that. I'm going to change that to just a blank, okay? And we're going to see what happens when I do this, okay? I'm going to get rid of that track 2 right here if it's letting me. For some reason, it's not tonight. It did last night. But notice when I do that, it's not changing it right now. It usually does. So it's going to stay where it is tonight because it's not letting it change. But when normally I see what's happened, it's lost track of where that track is. Let's move down, take a look at another one. Okay, what happens here is this. When you, I get it. I know what's happened. I forgot to add my iTunes library drive to the mix here. It's not up on the desktop. So I'll just kind of tell you what happens here. When you look at this, when you remove that disc number, it would move those tracks up in here into disc 1. Okay? And then so track 2, you would see 2 different track 2s. This first one right here, and then also this second one. So what will happen is that track number is going to jump around according to that disc setting. If you got everything with the track number in it, then it's going to put it in the right place. If the track number is not in the right place and it's a blank, then it's going to just move it and put it in with disc 1. That drove me nuts until I figured it out. And like I say, I'm not sure if this is this is something that I've noticed before or if it's new. Let's try it now. I finally got my thing mounted here. As you can see, this is track 2 of 2. Let's see if it'll let me edit this time. Since I figured out there it is. Okay, now watch this track number very carefully. All right, when I close this, when I click OK, that track, that St. James Infirmary, just jumped up here to disc 1. Now I can easily fix it by going back in here and putting that disc number back in where it should be. And notice that it will now jump back down to disc 2 where it was. Okay, you'll notice that this track, this third track right here, has that little exclamation mark. That's an indication that the last time I tried to get at it, it could not find the track. And that was while my iTunes library was offline. Okay, so that deals with multi-disc sets. Also, here's another one for you. I discovered, and this is not unique to iTunes 12. I've had this problem before. I went to add some music, and I discovered something. Sometimes When you go to add music, iTunes does not, I repeat, not uh, import it correctly. It just kind of sits there and it doesn't do anything. Let me get my web browser out of the way and I'll show you something. There are three different ways to add music to iTunes. I'm going to slide iTunes down out of the way a little bit. The first way is to simply double click on the track and iTunes will pull it in. I'm not going to add, well, we can add this one because it's not something that I have in my library. Notice that right now it's copying it into the library and it started playing. Sometimes that does not work. If that does not work, you have two other options for adding tracks. Okay, the first one is go into iTunes file menu, choose add to library, and then you're going to go and select the track that you want to add, click on it, and that should just add it into the library. I'm not going to do that with these tracks right now because these are some I already have in. And then the third option, let me go back and I'll show you this one. The third option is to take a track and just drag it, and you can do it multiple tracks like this. Drag it either into the iTunes icon there in the dock or into the iTunes window. And sometimes that works. Why am I showing you all three methods? Simply, sometimes one method will work when the others will not. So that's something that you want to keep in mind if you ever have a lot of difficulty with that. So sometimes one method will work and the other ones will not. Just use whichever method you prefer. I've done it either way, and as I say, sometimes it doesn't make a lot of difference. Sometimes it does. Use the one that you prefer. All right, I'm going to go ahead. I'm going to get iTunes out of the way here, and I'm going to bring up my browser window, and we'll talk about some of the other things that are coming up in Apple related news this week. The first one you'll see is from 9 to 5 Mac, and it's Ben Lovejoy wondering, as you can see from the title here, he's wondering if integrated VoIP support, voice over IP, is going to signal the end of voice plans as we know them on phones. And he kind of reaches the conclusion that no, it's not going to completely signal the end of the voice plan because there are still times when you need to make a voice call. He looks at the number of things, people now seem to be texting and using Skype and FaceTime and those types of programs much more than they are making phone calls. But there are still situations where you really need the phone. So it's VoIP is not going to kill it yet. I mean, for example, if you have to call 911, you want a reliable voice call. You don't have to worry. You don't want to have to worry about whether your VoIP app is going to go down. If you're calling someone who doesn't use these VoIP programs very much, they're certainly not going to be inclined to learn them just to talk to you. And we all have, friends and family members that don't FaceTime and don't Skype and things like that. So you won't see a complete drop of voice plans, but you may see them change a little bit. Those of you that have been following the show, and I know there are a few of you, have noticed that I frequently follow Kirk McLaren, aka Kirk, the iTunes guy. He has his own website, and he also writes regularly for Macworld and a couple of other locations. As you notice, I usually link to articles on his site, even though the article itself may be on another site. And the reason I do is he's got a good synopsis of the article on his site. And then if you want more detail, you can go to the original article. The reason I don't usually link to the original article is, for example, Macworld will play videos in the background as the page loads, and that kind of annoys me, even with a high speed connection. So, and I know for some of you that have slower connections or you're on metered bandwidth type connections, you don't want to have a video loading while you're trying to do something else. But his under his "Hey Apple, fix this" um, article, he's talking about, as you know, if you've been listening to the show, "Hey Apple, fix this" is his take on things that Apple needs to fix, things that are maybe not as good as they could be. You know that Kirk's a big Apple fan, but he is not shy about pointing out things that he thinks that could be better. And that's a case with this. He points out that he really thinks that the cloud driven services that Apple has in place need to function more reliably and in some cases a little more intuitively. And if you think that's only a few things like music and your iCloud email address, look at this. Kirk linked in his article to 40, about 40 different services that 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 are somewhat cloud dependent to one extent or another. Look at this: App Store, Apple ID, all the way down to iCloud web apps such as iCloud.com, your SMS messaging, Spotlight, all of those things, iTunes in the cloud, iTunes Match, and a host of other things, all tied to cloud use. So it becomes important to be able to fix this and have it working well. Kirk's also got, I haven't read this particular article yet because it's not a service that I use at the moment, but Kirk's also got an overview of the new features that are coming to Apple Music services. I'll have a link to that in the show notes, which will be going up shortly after the show. And for those of you that missed the keynote address, if you want a good, quick overview of the features that are coming to iOS, check out Cult of Mac. I'll have a link to this as well. Their site also has they did a little mini hands-on, complete with video of some of the changes coming to iOS 10. There's a lot of links there. There's also on that same site an overview of the messages of the changes that are coming to Mac OS Sierra. Now, as I mentioned a bit ago, I think that Siri is going to be the biggest game changer for me when it comes to the Mac. I don't use Siri a lot on my phone right now, just because there are parts of the day when I am in, I don't have a good internet connection. But the few times I have used it, I've liked it. There were some things that I would like to have done with Siri that I couldn't do because it just wasn't open to that uh, at the moment. As they open it up to more developers, I think I will be using it more. Just an example of something that I think this is something they did in the keynote to give an example of what happens when you open it up more often. Um, you've always been able to, for example, take Siri and add an appointment to your calendar because Siri functions well with Apple's products. So you can have Siri add an appointment to your calendar. But it has not worked as well with third party applications. But what if you could, for example, use Siri to make an Uber reservation? So you wouldn't have to uh, open the Uber app itself to make the reservation. Siri, as you know, Siri can make a reservation, make a entry for you in iCloud in your calendar without you having to open the calendar app manually. Siri just does it and puts it in there. Well, essentially, you could do the same thing with some of these other third party applications. You want to make a reservation somewhere. Okay. You do a search. You might say to Siri, hey Siri, show me all of the seafood restaurants within 20 miles. And it finds a restaurant, it's one you know you like. And so you decide, hey, I want to make a excuse me, I want to make a reservation. Well, the reservation can be made without having to open up a separate app. You know, if you got that third party app on your phone, you don't have to go in and manually open it and make the reservation. Siri would be able to do that for you, assuming that the developer has plugged that in. There are other things that are going to come up with that as it opens up to more development. But I think that's the one that caught my attention. That's the example that caught my attention. Uh, so that's a good set of reads there if you want an update of what's coming up. And finally, for tonight, I started to put this in tips and tricks, but it's not really a tip or trick. It's kind of a little mini rant. I want to make a suggestion to you, whether you are an experienced troubleshooter or you are a novice troubleshooter. This is something that I kind of learned the hard way. And it's happened to me more than once, but most recently within the last week. Okay. Um, as you are doing your troubleshooting, there's a couple things I think I ought to mention to you. First of all, you need to have the right tools. Now, that means something as simple as, for example, having the right size screwdriver or the right type of screwdriver to remove any screws that you might need. But it can also mean other things. It doesn't necessarily mean going out and purchasing a huge amount of new tools, for example. One of the things that I am starting to do, and I try to remember this when I do troubleshooting, is to make sure that I have the screws that I've taken out separated and marked. And one good way to do that so that they get put back in the right places. And one good way to do that is to get yourself a couple of plastic containers. They can really be old food containers that have gotten stained and you don't want to use them anymore. Or they've, one that's kind of gotten, maybe you left it on the stove and it got a little bent or deformed. Uh, what you want to do is take a couple of those containers and get ones with the lids that fit and snap on. And so here's what you do. You take you're about to start a new troubleshooting project. You take a couple of these containers and you take a roll of tape. Masking tape will do it, but that blue painter's tape is better because you can remove it when you're done. Take a roll of tape, take a little piece of tape, put it on the lid of the container, take a marker, write on the lid what's going in that container. So if that's let's just say, for example, I were taking apart my MacBook Pro. I'm going to take the screws out of the bottom case. I would write in there on that tape, bottom case screws. Okay. And as I take those screws out, I'm going to put them in that little container. I'm going to put the lid on it. So if I accidentally knock it over, the screws aren't going to go all over the place. Second tip I have for you is use your phone or your tablet and take pictures along the way. Whether you're using an iPhone or an Android device, whatever your device is, you can use a digital camera if you want to. Just something that you can take a picture before you start dismantling something, and then at each step, take a picture so that as you're putting things back together, you know what it's supposed to look like and what goes where, and particularly at the critical steps in the teardown. And then you can also, if you're using a tablet or even your phone, you can have the teardown directions on your phone or on your device so that you're looking at them as you're taking things apart. Uh, and so those are the three things that I wanted to be sure that I mentioned to you. I like to keep the directions and various setup manuals on my iPad so I can use as I'm troubleshooting or just when I want to change configurations on something. And the last little tip that I have for you is do not work on, no matter how badly you want something back up and functioning, do not work on something or troubleshoot something, particularly if it's something you have to take apart when you are upset or ticked off. Trust me when I tell you this, okay? Troubleshooting and repairing things when you are upset is a bad idea. Stupid and potentially expensive mistakes will happen. Okay. I'm just telling you from experience. Don't ask me what I did. Don't ask me how I know, because I don't think the inquisitors could get that out of me. Okay. It's embarrassing. But I will tell you that stupid and or potentially expensive mistakes will happen if you try to engage in troubleshooting while you are upset, ticked off, annoyed, however you want to put it. That's just my tip. It might save you a few bucks. And that's going to just about do it this week, guys. I hope that you enjoyed the material that we have. I'm going to try to add more screencasts in the coming weeks. Uh, like I say, next week we're going to be looking probably at Time Machine and maybe whatever other little tips and tricks I can cook up. But also, I'm kind of planning in future shows to add maybe just a 5-minute segment on some of the misconceptions or some of the misinformation that seems to be present when you're dealing with Macs. Things like understanding Time Machine and some of the misconceptions about Time Machine, misconceptions about other aspects of running the Mac. There are all kinds of we've gotten several threads recently about users, for example, who tried to delete a boot camp partition without running the boot camp assistant. They tried to do it through disk utility. That does not work well. We may delve into something like that. All kinds of little tips and tricks. They're just like 5-minute fixes, things you might not know about your Mac. So look for those in the coming weeks. And until next week, we've been glad to have you here. We hope to see you back again next week. This is your host, Sylvester Rock, aka Sly Dude on the forum. If you have a question or a comment about the show, please post it in there's a segment in the news and community announcement. It says Mac Forum Sunday Chat. Just post your question there. I do try to answer those, even if I don't know the answer right away. If you ask me a question about the show and I've got to think about how to do it or think about whether it's a good idea, I'll at least answer you back and let you know that I've read the post. So until next week, I'll see you in the forum, and thank you for joining us.